Steve Rex at 425. It's where we live. One of the things that's a huge part of our lives, whether we have kids in the system or we are just paying our taxes to support it and count on it to work well, is our school system. In public education, the government wants us to despise our teachers whose salaries are the biggest line item in the budget. And teachers' unions want us to not trust the government, who never seems to properly fund the system, but talk like they do. Sandwiched in between the higher level decision makers of the boards and government and the grassroots school-based level of the teachers are the principals and the vice principals, between a rock and a hard place, if you will. Their leader for this school year is Durham's own Jeff Maharaj, a principal that I've worked with in Oshawa. I'm pleased to say that Jeff met me at Exit 425 for some insight into what is going on with education in Ontario. Steve Ray, Exit 425. It's where we live and learn and pay taxes. Today's guest at Exit 425.
In the main corridor of Exit 425.
Local politicians to connect with families.
What are some unique challenges?
Thanks very much, Steve, for having me.
Exit 425. It's where we live. Jeff, thanks for meeting me here at Exit 425.
Steve, it's my pleasure to be here today. I know it's been a while since I've actually met with you in person, but it is great to be here, and I'm hopeful I won't let you and your listeners down with my interview today.
I'm confident you won't. So again, thanks for being here. Jeff, who or what is the OPC, the Ontario Principals Council? Is it a union? And how do you feel about my description about administrators being between a rock and a hard place?
Well, let's talk about OPC first. As you mentioned, I am the president for the Ontario Principals Council. Unfortunately, I'm coming to the end of my term, but it's been a pleasure serving the principals of Ontario. Our members are Ontario's public school principals and vice principals. So we have about 5,500 members. We are not a union. We are a professional organization with volunteer membership. And basically, our role is to support the work of principals every day, whether it's through our providing benefits for them, professional learning for principals, as well as we have a variety of membership services. We also provide professional protection services to our members. So that's in a nutshell what we do at OPC. As I mentioned, there's a lot of members, and we spend a lot of time out in our different boards supporting those members and the work that they do. The big thing that we do, which is what will probably come up through our conversation today, is we're also the body for collective bargaining of our terms and conditions, as they're called, with the Ministry of Education. So it is a bit of an undertaking that we take part in on behalf of our members. I love your message about being between a rock and a hard place. I almost want to say that we're actually between several hard places, several rocks, and there's a lot going on all around us. We are in the middle of students, parents, teachers, education staff, the ministry, the senior teams at boards. We are between all of those things. It is a difficult place to be, but I like to think of us as being the soft point between all those hard places that brings it together kind of nicely. In your role as a vice principal, you saw this day to day, like when you're back in your education days, and definitely that is what the work continues to be for our principals and vice principals. We are that kind of connective tissue, as you might say, between everyone that's involved in education.
Great description. Recently, Bill 101 was passed by the legislature to become the Putting Student Achievement First Act. It seems to have a pretty broad reach. What are the key points of that?
That's a very interesting question to start off with. I'm going to say that Bill 101 has been a lot of the work I've been doing over the last several months. In a nutshell, Bill 101 is, as the government will say, it is there to support students and to help them help get the best out of our students and from our education system. But what I would like to point out is that if you've read even the long version of Bill 101, there's only a handful of times that it actually mentions students. So it's ironic that we're saying it's putting students first, but the actual Minister of Education and the Ministry of Education are mentioned dozens of times throughout the document. And so what we see this as is the government trying to centralize authority over school boards. And a lot of it is seemingly a power grab, for lack of a better term, for the minister. It allows the minister to make unilateral decisions and impose them on boards as he feels are necessary. And he bases what a lot of he says based on conversations he has had with people around education. So, for example, I know in an interview recently, I saw him say that parents are fed up and didn't know that their kids were not being assessed for attendance. So, one of the powers that he looks to give himself is to be able to change assessment practices within education. And so, you might hear him speak of how we're going to tie marks to attendance. That is a very old practice that probably he had in school. I know I had it in school, but it left soon thereafter because there's no evidence to show that that was a good way to assess students' abilities. So again, other than just being the power grab, they're looking at redoing the governance of education. So the way school boards function, who is at the top of the school board structure, and who does that top person answer to? That's a big piece of it. In his new model, where they're looking at having a not non-educator at the top of school boards now, a person that answers directly to the minister and can be fired by the minister, not by the school board, by the minister, then that person would be above what was previously our leads of school boards, which often was a senior educator that had come up through the ranks and been all different levels and superintendents and then becomes a director of education. That person is now being bumped down in the hierarchy of school boards and has less power, less authority. The person that is in charge of school boards or hope to be in charge of school boards will be a CEO of education. And that CEO will not need to have education qualifications or a background in education. They need to have business experience. So the ministry is looking to basically monitor the money more closely in education, how it's being spent and who answers to whom when there's issues with how the money is being spent. That governance piece is really important because it also impacts our trustees. So there was talk earlier of getting rid of trustees from school boards. Which to me, as a citizen of a municipality, is scary because that is the representative of citizens in education, is their locally elected trustees. I hate thinking that one level of government is getting rid of another level of government just because they can and because they want to have more say. That to me is a problem. And I think if you're a fan of democracy, you're a fan of having trustees still in place. Now, I won't say that every trustee is being doing the best work that they've ever been able to do, but it looks like to me that this ministry has decided that, there's a few bad actors, so let's punish everyone for the actions of those few bad actors. And I know in my experience as an educator, that never works. If I have a class and there's a student that's not paying attention or talking during the lesson, I'm not punishing the whole class. I'm going to deal with that one student. And I think that's what needs to happen is that we need to look at maybe changing the rules that govern our trustees. Maybe we look at having consequences for behaviors that are, unproductive, whatever the case may be, but on an individualized basis, not a sweeping change for the whole system. What's really curious to me is that Bill 101 has passed. It's received royal assent. But within it, there is no talk about how they're going to apply it to the education model other than a few title changes. The implementation of what this is all going to be has not been addressed. And they're not or by they, I mean the Ministry of Education, they've not been in really fulsome conversations with the various stakeholders on how will they implement these changes. Specifically for myself as a president of the Ontario Principals Council, I think that I would be a good person to talk to because of my knowledge of schools and how schools work. I've had this conversation with the Minister of Education. He has heard a lot from me with regards to the need to have fulsome conversations with everyone, teachers, education workers, but also principals, about how do we change education for the better? What are the things that we can do? I'm open to giving feedback. Like, I don't even need to be the person that comes up with the ideas, but I like giving feedback because I've worked in schools. For myself, this is 28 years now in education, most of which I spent in schools, working with staff and students and trying to make it a good place for everyone. And I think that's experience is what the government needs to lean on. They need to come to the leadership groups for all the different stakeholders involved and have conversations about what can we do to make things better. Because yeah, I agree, we do need to change some things for our students' sake, but we also need to change some things to support everyone else that comes together in this whole thing. And we really need to do a job together to make it work for our students and see better results for them.
So we're going to end up with school boards that are basically extension offices of the ministry, and they're going to be run by non-education people who presumably can manage money maybe better. That's the plan, or more in line with how the government wants it managed, whether that's better or not. And then and so those people would be more like the board supervisors that we've seen imposed on several school boards in Ontario.
I would agree with that, and I would say you're hitting it right on. We have right now, there's 5 public school boards, because I think there's 3 others that are under supervision right now. And I meet with representatives of the principal groups in the 5 public boards pretty regularly and have discussions with them. And what I would say is that that model has been failing and continues to fail right now. So most of the boards were taken over because they were told that there's financial mismanagement. And if you go and look at the budgets that are being proposed by all of those boards, they're all almost identical to the budgets that were passed previously. It is not the finances, it's not the management of the money, it is the conversations that are had between the ministry and those boards that has led to them becoming supervised because of them not buying into everything that was they were told to do. And when I have conversations with principal leaders that are in those boards, my understanding is that it is a strained relationship between the supervisors and the school boards, the people that work within those boards. There is a lack of transparency. There's a lack of communication happening. For example, just the other day, I believe the minister was quoted saying that those supervisors do not answer to the public. They are not responsible for having any kind of public conversations about the work that they're doing. They are doing his work, and questions can go through him and not through them. That blows my mind, because if you've ever had a child in a school board, you've probably heard from or seen the director of education, because they are public figures and they know that their responsibility is to talk to people about what it is that's going on in their kids' schools and what the plan is moving forward. I know right now in the Durham District School Board, we have a wonderful director. She's very vocal, she's very present, and Camille Williams-Taylor is always at the front of the board. She's a representative of the board. It worries me that we want to move towards a system where there's invisible people running school boards that don't have any kind of accountability to the people that are sending their children to these schools.
And I've said several times to different people that, the school boards, yeah, there could be problems there. And, maybe the trustee model isn't the best as it is. But it's that local accountability. And if we were to eliminate those boards, even like on so many levels, whether you're an employee of the school board and your paycheck isn't quite correct and you've got to call someone and sort it out, are we calling, Kingston, or are we calling in Durham, Whippy?
Yeah.
If you're a parent who's having difficulty understanding what's happening for your child or the child itself, maybe that, a bigger bureaucracy, which happens with centralized systems, it just becomes that much more difficult to navigate. So interesting. I appreciate your insights into that. My next question actually was going to be, does this legislation address adequately the needs of the public education system in Ontario? Good bits versus missing or inadequate bits. You've touched on that a lot, but maybe you have something more to say?
Yeah, I would say that the bill does have some good bits. But there's a lot of questions that those good bits have that are unanswered. Excuse me. So, when the bill was first proposed, we actually at OPC wrote a paper that we submitted to the ministry with our critique of the bill. We spoke about the things that we saw that were positive. So there is mention of supports for our students with special needs, a need for better safety and security in buildings, things of those nature we're on board with. But in our critique, we also talked about here's another idea, try this, and we gave suggestions. Eventually, we were invited actually to give witness to the committee that was working on the bill. And I, along with the other principal leadership groups in Ontario, we had an opportunity to speak to the committee. And we spoke of our concerns. We spoke about the things that we hoped that we could see come out of that. We offered ourselves as consultants for free to the government to give ideas and to help them refine the bill, especially when it comes to implementing the bill. But as we saw, very soon after the committee met, the bill was pushed through with very little debate. There was a couple revisions in the bill that only were two sections that mentioned the Minister of Education. And the bill pretty much went unedited from its first reading to when it received its assent. So it's worrisome. It is worrisome. And I think the biggest thing for me is that it does not deal with the core issues that we are seeing in schools. It does not talk about the funding and the chronic underfunding that we are seeing in schools. It does not specifically speak about how they're going to address the needs for additional supports for our special needs students, because we do work on a system of integration where all of our students go to school together. We need supports for certain students, more supports for some than others. And it doesn't get to the roots of violence in schools. It does not deal with the issues that are happening where we have staff members going home injured on a regular basis, or we have other students getting injured by their classmates on a regular basis. None of that is addressed, and those are the biggest issues in schools right now. I would say over the last 10 years, the job of the principal has changed greatly. And this has done very little, or this bill does very little to address any of those issues that we are seeing that are happening in schools that are led by principals that are really concerned about what they're seeing on a daily basis.
On that note, in a relatively recent interview with OSSTF presidents from Kawartha and Durham, and that's the Ontario Secondary School Teachers Federation, Chris Clark talked about advocating for his systems administrators who are not part of the union, principals and vice principals who are, again, not part of his union, when speaking with superintendents, otherwise known as senior staff. What are you hearing from and seeing within the ranks of principals and vice principals represented by OPC? What's happening to these people?
It's not good. I could start off by saying that. I would say that right now our principals and vice principals are overworked, they're overstressed, and they're trying to pull themselves in various directions to support everything that's happening in our schools. I mentioned before that we talked about how the role of the principal has changed greatly. We actually created a paper that we took and discussed with each political party, a provincial political party this year, talking about how our job has changed so much that we should be reconsidered or reclassified as what kind of job we have. But also, alongside of that is what needs to happen to support not only principals, but to improve the conditions within schools. And because our members are really, really struggling. We do a yearly membership survey, and we did one this year, and the data is really worrisome. We are seeing that a lot of our members are struggling with their mental health, struggling physically because they are getting injured in the workplace regularly. They are observing behaviors in schools that makes the job of teachers very difficult. And then the big thing is that the job of being a principal or vice principal is becoming less and less attractive to people. We are seeing school boards having a very hard time replacing principals and vice principals when they retire or leave or go on to other things. There's going to be a drain at leadership in education because what we're seeing is that the majority of our members are able to retire in the next few years. Me, myself, I can go in 3 years. I'm not going yet, but it's possible that it'll happen soon. And what we're seeing is that because we're not attracting enough people into becoming vice principals and then principals, there's going to be a gap. So we haven't seen it yet in a lot of our GTA boards, but when we go away from the GTA and we look in some of our more remote boards, it's already happening. They are hiring unqualified people to be principals and vice principals. They are having schools that are sharing principals because they don't have enough to cover all the schools,
Mm.
or they don't have the funding to cover all the schools with a principal. And we are seeing some great issues coming out of that. And so we're really worried about the future of the profession. And, even here in the GTA, we're now starting to see administrators being laid off because of funding changes to boards. So it's a worrisome time in education, and it's really worrisome for our principals and vice principals across the province.
Wow. Not exactly an uplifting message.
I would be remiss if I thought that it was just all doom and gloom for being a principal or vice principal. But what I tell people all the time is that I got into this because I love the job. I love what I do, and I continue to love what I do. I just wish I loved it as much right now as I loved it a few years ago. That's kind of how the attitude is with a lot of our members. They do what they do because they love working with kids. They love working with teachers, and that love is what keeps them coming back every day, but it could be better. And we can see that systematically over probably the last 8 years, we've seen the education system lose its grip in setting where it is, and it's not quite what it once was. I don't want to live in the past. I never want to live in the past, but there's ways that we can improve on what we're doing now and get back closer to where it used to be, where we're seeing success for all of our students, where we're seeing, administrators and teachers and education staff that were happy to go to work every day, because those are some of the issues that we're seeing now. People aren't there as much as they used to be. The connection between students and staff is not where it used to be, and we need to work on that if we really want to see positive outcomes for our students.
And in Simon Sinek's world, happy staff make for happy clients, and our clients are those young people and children that are attending the school. So very valid points. Very soon, a new round of bargaining will take place to avoid a mess as we approach a new school year. What role does OPC play in that process?
That's an interesting one. So you hit it right on the head. A lot of the education groups, the teachers, the education workers, our support staff, their contracts are up, and they're going to be starting that process of collectively bargaining in the fall. We know that often there are some workplace issues that come out of that process. So what we like to do is be supportive to our principals and vice principals. At OPC, we send out information and we stay in contact regularly with our members, talking or providing tips and information that will help support them throughout the process if there are any kind of workplace things going on. The one thing that is interesting is that principals and vice principals, we're still under our terms of contract, our terms and conditions. It doesn't come up for another year. Once it does, then we too enter collective bargaining. But because we're not a union, it looks very different for us. Our collective bargaining is pretty low key. It is often in line with what other groups have gotten. So we are not looking at it being overly contentious for us. But at the same time, we do have rights as workers, and we do express those rights, and we do want to see improved conditions for everyone in the building. But the big thing, I think, for administrators when their staff are going through this process is to be supportive and to be positive, but also to follow the lead from OPC as well as what their boards asked of them during those times. It looks a little bit different in different school boards, but I would say that in Durham, the history has been pretty positive of when staff are bargaining, administrators are in a good position to be supportive on a professional level of their staff and to be understanding as things happen throughout that process.
Where can people find out more about education in Ontario and what the views of Ontario Principals Council is,
Well,
what they
yeah,
are at any given time?
Sure thing. I think the big thing with staying abreast of what's going on in education, the actual Ministry of Education has a great website. It's through the Ontario Gov's website, and they actually put all their policies online. All of it is there for us to read. It's just taking the time to go on there and take a look at what's there for us. As far as what's happening with OPC, we have a really good website. We are www.principals with an A.ca. And on that website, we have a members area, but we also have a public area. The public area covers a lot of what we do and what we are trying to accomplish in education. The public is welcome to look at that public area and get the information about what we're doing at OPC. And if they have any questions, they're welcome to call the office or email the president because he likes to talk to people.
That's awesome. Jeff, thanks so much for meeting me here at Exit 425. I really appreciate you taking the time to enlighten us on a few things. It's a group, obviously, that most people never hear from until they have to talk to them about their kids' mark in math or something. So
For sure.
thank you again.
It's been my pleasure, Steve. Good luck with everything.